Welcome back, friends. I am Jason, and I'm out today in this nasty, nasty weather. It's probably 48 degrees, maybe 50, give or take, and it's a misty rain, just a steady, misty rain. Everything is soaking wet. And in the survival scenario, this would be pretty bad. You'd be in a bad spot if you're dressed like I am in a cotton t-shirt out here amongst all the wild. You'd be in a bad spot. So what my question is to you to start this video out, and I'll give you some time to answer, is what's your priority right now? Is it gonna be shelter or is it gonna be fire? You get two choices. Those are your only two choices. Don't think outside the box in this one. So should I take the time to build a shelter? Now, obviously, if I was dressed appropriately and I had a rain poncho on or something like that to keep me out of the elements, I wouldn't have a situation to begin with. But let's say I'm not dressed appropriately. Let's say I've lost my rain gear or I fell in the river or something. Who knows what the scenario is, but let's say I'm not dressed appropriately and I don't have any shelter. I don't have tents or tarps or any of that. What's my priority right now? Should I take the time in this nasty, wet, misty conditions to build a shelter? Like I'm getting wet right now. Should I build a shelter? Which will take me, from experience, I know this, it's gonna take me at least a few hours, absolute minimum to build any sort of semi-watertight shelter, at least a few hours. Or should I put all my attention, all my focus on building a fire, great big jumbo fire that's gonna help keep me warm even if it is nasty and raining? So in the comment section, what I want you to do is tell me what you would do. If you're in this situation, you're in the woods, you're dressed like an idiot, what would you do? Build a fire or build a shelter? I'll give you a minute. Come on up, baby. Come on up, baby. Now, for me personally, now that you've put your comment in there, what you would do. Obviously, if I had a tarp, I'd put it up. But if I don't have one, I had to build a shelter. What I would focus on first is getting myself a fire. And my go-to fire starter is a Bic lighter right there. Bic lighters are reliable. They get the job done. But there's a problem with Bic lighters, and it's this. See this little droplet of water right here? And that droplet of water fell from the sky and it hit my lighter in the absolute worst spot right there on the striker and runs down onto that tiny little ferrocerium rod that's on your lighter. This is what happens. One drop of water is all it takes to make your lighter absolutely useless, at least for the time being. Now I could get this thing to dry back out, but let's say it's raining harder than it is right now, and it's really tough for me to get this lighter going again. I could blow it out. Usually, if I had a dry shirt, usually by blowing it out, I can usually get it going again pretty quick. You can see I've already got a spark there. And with a few strikes, I can usually get it going again pretty soon. Sometimes if I'm still dry enough, if you just put it in your pocket for a little while, it'll dry itself out. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm not gonna work on it anymore. I'm just gonna let it dry itself out in my pocket, assuming I'm not completely soaking wet. So on my knife here, my great big jumbo knife that I'm trying out, just experimenting with, this is a modified On3 machete. The machetes are made by Bear Forest Knives, and they typically have a 12-inch blade on them. I cut this one down to 8 inches, and it's a pretty sweet knife. But anyway, on my knife right here, I have a great big jumbo ferrocerium rod. Now, I always wear this one around my neck, this little one right here. And it's an excellent emergency backup. However, if you do not have some sort of tinder, some sort of natural tinder that you've sourced from the wild, or some sort of man-made tinder that you've brought with you, you're gonna have a really tough time getting this small little ferrocerium rod to ignite whatever it is, marginal tinder that you can find. And that's the problem with ferrocerium rods just in general, is you need tinder. With a lighter, with an open flame, maybe, not quite. But with an open flame, you can oftentimes skip the tinder phase and go straight to kindling as long as you've got some dry, small, teeny tiny little kindling. The other problem, if I was to choose to build some sort of natural shelter, and let's say it's not raining super hard, but everything is already wet. If I was to build some sort of natural shelter, every time I touch a branch, it rains on me. Every time I bump a tree, it doesn't matter what kind of tree, if I'm trying to collect some pine boughs or something like that to give myself some sort of natural roof, Every time I touch a tree, it rains on me and I get wetter and wetter and wetter and even more soaked and colder than I am right now. So what we have here is the band of marauding pirates, biker pirates, that we've had to avoid, and that's why we're in this survival situation in the first place. The leader of the biker gang is coming through the forest at the moment. You gotta really watch out for this one. She shows no mercy. So typically in my area, if I wanted to start a fire with a ferro rod and I was looking for natural resources, natural tinders, I would look for tulip poplar bark, because you can strip it down, you can break it down, mash it up, tear it apart, and it turns into this really fine, fuzzy ball, this really nice bird's nest that is easily ignited with sparks off of a ferro rod. But right now, good luck. Good luck finding something that's dry. Yes, you can make it dry eventually, but it takes a long time. And in these conditions, if you are wet, it's not like you can just put it in your pocket and it's gonna dry out. If your clothes are wet, it's actively raining, you have no shelter, it's never gonna dry out. It's just not going to happen. So what I would look for is something like this. This stump right here is probably, not for sure, but probably Fatwood. This is probably an old pine stump that's been preserved by the resin that's inside of it. So that is what I would want to cut into. And luckily, I've got a large knife. If I didn't have a large knife, you could do it with a small knife. Just a bigger one makes it significantly easier. So I'm going to cut into this thing, and I'm going to see what we're working with. Yeah, so there's some. So this isn't ideal. This isn't like perfect, really good stuff, but it is pine resin right there. That is Fatwood right there in the center. So I could use this for sure. Maybe. That center part is what I want. That's pretty good stuff there. That's probably some good stuff there. Yeah, so give it the old smell test. And that tells you that it's probably decent. It's got that resin there, that right there, that dark, rich color. That's what we want. And we could use this to help us get our fire going. So even if it was wet, there's a chance that I can keep this dry enough to where I could ignite it with a ferro rod, even a tiny little one like the one that's around my neck. So what I would do is I would just process this down just a little bit. I give myself some small little shavings, little curls like this off of that Fatwood. Some people call this lighter knot. Some people call it Fatwood. Just depends on where you're from. So I'd get myself some curls like that right there. And I wouldn't stop there. I would make sure I do everything that I possibly can to prep my fire before I try to ignite this thing. Then I'd take some bigger slivers like this right here. Yep, it smells piney. Here's another one right here next to us. It's probably full of resin, but let's find out. See that knife? Look at that. Thing really flexes a lot, but snaps right back into its shape, doesn't bend the blade at all. It's good stuff. Decent, not great, not grade A, but decent. Just out of curiosity, I'm gonna see if my lighter's working now. I'm not gonna use it for this fire starting experiment, but it's just been in my pants, been in my pocket, and it's working again. See how this Fatwood burns? Yeah, it burns pretty good. It's good stuff. Not grade A, not the best, but it will work. I've collected some Fatwood here, and even though it's completely saturated and soaked outside, this is still going to reliably burn, for sure. This stump right here, this whole stump is full of resin. I could pull this whole thing probably out of the ground and use that to help me get my fire going as well, if I could get it out of the ground. Yeah, I guarantee the only reason this is still here after years and years of sitting there and rotting in the ground, not rotting in the ground, is because of the resin that's in it. Yeah, look at that stuff right there. This is prime real estate right there when it comes to fire right there. That's some good stuff. I'm just gonna take this whole stump right here, this whole big rooty knot that we found in the ground, because it's all got that resin in it, and we're gonna use that as the beginnings of our fire. That'll burn for a long time, and all of our kindling that we're gonna collect is stuff that's off the ground. Like this is an old hemlock tree that looks like it's probably completely dead. Might be a couple of, no, I think it is completely dead. But all these branches on the end, you see these little tiny twiggies? These are perfect. That's what we want, those tiny little pieces. Even though they are currently wet, it's gonna be okay because we found that fat wood. If we did not have that fat wood, we'd have to go through some more steps, which I've shown on previous videos for sure. And we'd have to scrape off the outside, the wetness off of our branches like that. Scrape them all down. The beginnings of our fire would have to get as dry as we can get it. And then maybe we make some feather sticks. You know, nothing beautiful, just some primitive, some really crude feathers like that. And a whole bunch of these. And we'd make a whole bunch of small little feathers like that, shaving off the wet bark, and then we could potentially get our fire going. But because we have all this awesome fat wood right here, it's not gonna be that necessary, because that's gonna burn for a long time. It'll dry out anything pretty much that we put on it. And in weather like this, it's gonna be a game changer and possibly a lifesaver. So the insides of these twigs, these insides of these branches are still dry. You hear that snap? It's soaking wet. I mean, it's been raining for days. Everything is soaked. I mean, there's absolutely nothing out here that you're gonna find that's dry. But the inside of this wood is still fairly dry, which is nice. And that's what I need to help me get my fire going. All right. So the evergreens are gonna be by far your best bet for collecting kindling. They just light up the easiest, they ignite the fastest. You can use all sorts of things, doesn't really matter. As long as it's small in diameter and dry, it'll work. But by far, your evergreens are gonna be the best. And it's really easy. If you're not really great with tree identification, like I'm not amazing at it. I know most of the trees around here, the main species, but if you're not that great at tree identification, it's easy to tell the evergreens, the pines and the spruces and all of that from your deciduous trees. You can look at the needles. They keep their needles all year round, and you just get the branches that don't have needles on them and you're good to go. A lot of people always ask about the tree house in the background back here. See that? It's an 8x8 tree house. I primarily use it as my deer blind. This is a pretty heavily used game trail right here that we're right next to actually. And the deer come right through here, somewhere between 40 and 50 yards away, and it's just perfect. So that's what that is. All right. So this right here, what I have, is what I want before I start my fire. This much right here. This is enough kindling to get my fire started. Now, obviously, it's not enough fuel to sustain the fire, but we can gather that in just a bit. But I think for demonstration purposes, I think you'll understand. So in this bundle here, I've got everything from teenies, see that? Really scrawny little tiny twig that's smaller than a pencil lid. And I've got everything all the way up to like finger size. So all of this here is what I need to get my fire started. And this is probably enough. From here, I would gather bigger stuff like, you know, finger size and then wrist size, arm size, leg size, whatever, more and more fuel. I don't need to split stuff down. For the most part, I don't split up my firewood unless I'm trying to put it in a wood stove or something like that. If I'm building a fire out in the woods, I don't split a lot of wood. It's just, I haven't found it to be that necessary. But in wet conditions, with maybe frozen wood as the situation, maybe splitting down into the core of wood might be beneficial. But here, in this situation, not necessary. So I found the only dry spot in the woods. Come look at this. Right here is the only dry spot that exists out here. Everything else is soaked. All right, so I'm not making this up, guys. It's been raining for days. It has been pouring down rain for days. It just finished pouring down rain maybe an hour or two ago. Everything is soaking wet. It's still misting right now. This is still dry. Incredibly so. I have found the only dry spot, spiders live here, the only dry spot in these woods is still here, which is incredible. The way this tree is leaning, this big pine tree, it's leaning in this direction and it's protecting this one little spot. So maybe right now, let's say it was actively raining. This might be where I need to get my fire started. Perhaps, maybe I need to build myself some sort of really impromptu shelter to protect my fire in the meantime while I'm working on this little baby tiny flame. But in this situation right now in real time, this would be an excellent spot to start my fire. Now, I wouldn't want to keep my fire in this spot as it grows because it would climb up this tree, set the tree on fire perhaps, and then we'd have a problem. Setting a forest fire, starting a forest fire in these situations is almost zero. A lot of people always worry about that. They'll say things like, you know, you should really clear all your area out. If I started my fire on these wet leaves right now and I tried to start a forest fire, I'd probably almost certainly fail. I could not start a forest fire right now if I tried my hardest. But that aside, I still wouldn't want to burn this tree up if I could help it. But what I would use this for is my shelter. Like I said, I'm not going to take a whole bunch of time to build this big elaborate shelter because it would take me hours. I'd be getting soaked and I'd be getting colder and colder and colder. So what I would do is I'd start my fire right here, maybe while it's being protected by this tree. And then as it starts to grow, I would move my fire down the hill. I'd move my fire to my fireplace that maybe I put right here. And then my shelter now is this right here. Now I am sitting in the only protection that I've got in this forest, and I'm just keeping my fire alive right here. And that might be my strategy for this situation. So that's what we're gonna do. Could start the fire right here because it's not actively like pouring down rain right now, so I could just dig myself out a little spot right here and I wouldn't need to start it in my little cubby hole up here. So that's what I'm gonna do. Since it's not actively raining, I'm gonna get myself a nice little spot to start my fire. I'm just kicking the dirt flat, give myself a little backstop so my fire doesn't kind of try to roll down this hill like a dog. Here's all my kindling right there. Enough to get my fire started. Obviously, I'd want more fuel. I'd want more firewood. I could use my little cubby hole to protect my kindling. I could stick that in there if I needed to. Keep it dry. But I'm gonna get ready to start my fire right now. I don't wanna mess around. I wanna get this thing going because I'm cold. Not really that cold actually because I've been moving around a lot. That's one benefit. They say a fire keeps you warm 3 times. Collecting it, building it, and then sitting by it. That's good stuff, man. When that catches on fire, that's gonna burn forever. That's gonna burn a long time. If you're starting your fire with a ferro rod, you gotta start small. You can't start with something big and chunky. If I was just using a lighter, I could light this up pretty easy. There, I'm just gonna have that ready to go. Oh, that's good stuff. Work good. Did an experiment the other day and a chip, you know, not too dissimilar to that right there, burned for, what was it, 13 minutes? Mm-hmm. Now on my sheath here, I have attached my big ferro rod. I could use this one obviously, but I've got a great big jumbo one here, and that's gonna work way better because of the big sparks it's gonna throw. And then underneath that, what's holding it in place is some rubber. Now let's say this is rubber inner tube. Now let's say I didn't have all this fat wood, maybe I had a little bit of tinder with me, or my lighter was working. If my lighter was working, I would take a sliver of this. I would take a sliver of this right here, maybe a bigger chunk. I might be a little bit more generous than that right there, but I think you get the idea. So if my lighter was working and it wasn't soaking wet, all I would need is some of that rubber inner tube and my Bic lighter, and I'm in business right there. And that right there is a huge game changer. That's a flame extender right there. That's what they use in the jungles of the Amazon. They use a Bic lighter with a little bit of inner tube. And that, my friends, will help you get your fire going in the worst of conditions. But remember, our lighter isn't working. It's wet. It's pouring down rain. It's soaked. It ain't gonna do the job right now. So we're stuck with our backup that works even when it is wet. And that's our ferro rod. All right, so what I like to do is I like to give myself some ferro rod scrapings, especially when it's nasty like this. So I'll scrape some shavings off of my ferro rod and get myself a little bit of a pile. So when I do ignite it, it really busts into flame. It's like the 4th of July. So I'll just kind of slowly scrape my ferro rod like this without igniting it, being careful not to ignite it. If you do it slow, it won't. And that gives me a pile of shavings right there. I can use that now in conjunction with all this fat wood here to get my fire started. Putting these tiny little chips of fat wood on there. Put my fire starter knife where I won't lose it. Little chips of fat wood, just getting it going. Making sure they each ignite as I put them on. And not smother out each other. What I can start doing is adding my wet kindling. So all that's where that smoke is going, that's where the heat is. So I could take my little kindling right here, and I can slowly start adding that as my fire builds. Very gently put it next to it. And the heat from that fat wood burning is going to slowly start drying out all my kindling here. I'll do the same thing with this pile, and I'll just set it next to it like that. And as it starts to build up and dry out, I can start pushing it down on top of that fire. As this fire is just this baby infant, you know, you got to be careful with it. You got to go slow with it. You can't rush it. You got to have patience. If it was pouring down rain right now, luckily it's not, but if it was pouring down rain right now, I would have to be perhaps sheltering it with my body. If I had some sort of jacket on or something, I might be spreading it out over top of it while it builds and gains some steam as it dries itself out. Like I said before, I might have had to start it up in this little cubby here in this little hole. I might have had to build some sort of lean-to shelter for it. But right now, I think it's gonna go. Everything is wet. All this stuff is soaking wet. I mean, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but look at the kindling I'm using. It's all soaked. It's all wet. Everything is wet. Nothing is dry here. So what's the priority, guys? What is the priority? Would I want to build a shelter in rainy, wet conditions? Or would I want to get my fire going and focus on this first? Once I get this fully sustained and it's burning bigger fuels, then maybe I could start thinking about building some sort of shelter. But for me, honestly, I think that in this situation, in this climate, 48, 50 degrees, wet, misty, everything's soaked, and it's potentially going to start raining on me any second now. I don't have shelter. Me, personally, this is what I would do. I would build myself a fire, I would get it going, and then hopefully I've got the resources and I've got the energy left to build myself some sort of shelter. Maybe right here. Maybe I get myself some sort of little lean-to shelter around this already semi-dry spot. But even if it was pouring down rain, and if I could just keep this fire going and I could build it as big as I could possibly get it, I might be okay. Not ideal, obviously, but I might be okay. So guys, I can't control the weather. I wish it was pouring down rain right now so we could really struggle to get this fire going. But at the moment, I think it's gonna be easy peasy. It's gonna be a sustainable fire here really shortly. This has been burning about 20 minutes, I'd say, give or take. Since I first ignited the fire, it's been burning for about 20 minutes without adding any extra kindling. Now, from start to finish, from the time I walked up here and decided I wanted to start a fire to having actual flame, to having a lit fire, probably took me 20 minutes, maybe. That's including sourcing the fat wood, gathering the kindling, processing it, and getting it going. I'd say 20 minutes-ish, give or take. That's, you know, significant. That's a significant result after 20 minutes of effort. Now, assuming you can sustain this during a downpour. That fat wood's gonna come in really handy. That fat wood stump is still burning in there. Let's see if I can get down to it. It's still in there. That's it right there. And that's gonna burn for a long time. That's not gonna go out, and that's gonna keep this flame alive. Even if it was wet, man, I wish I could control the weather and make it downpour right now to prove the concept. But unfortunately, I can't. I can't control the misery of this situation to that degree. I came out here this morning, when I decided to do this video this morning, it was pouring down rain. It was just bucketing down. I thought, oh, this is a good day to go do this. And then it started misting, and I thought, okay, as long as it keeps misting, perfect. But then here we go, and we got, you know, just overcast and just barely misting, just barely. Nothing significant. I'm not miserable enough. I'm sorry. So if I chose to build a shelter instead of build a fire, I'd be soaking wet if it was raining right now, obviously. Sorry, can't control the weather. I'd be soaking wet. I'd still be building my shelter. It wouldn't even be remotely watertight at the moment. I'd be soaking wet, and then finally, after a couple more hours at least of building my shelter, I'd be sitting in a soaking wet shelter, and I'd be drenched and shivering. So, it's hard for me to not say, in this situation, to build a fire first. That's what I would say to do. That's what I would recommend. Get a sustainable fire, a warm, hot source of fire, so I can start to dry out even just a little bit. I've sat next to fires before when it's been actively raining, and the front side of me has been dry. Obviously, the back side of me gets wet because it's raining. My shoulders and stuff are getting wet, but the front side of me is drying out. And if I just rotate, I just keep this thing going, I keep stoking this fire, I keep it alive and get it as big and as hot as I can so it can sustain itself through the wet weather. I think that's the right choice. That's just my opinion. You let me know what you think about it in the comments section, guys. I really do appreciate you watching all of my videos. If you haven't already hit the thumbs up, please do. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you hit that notifications bell as well so you don't miss out on any of the content. I'm putting out videos almost every single day except for Sunday. Can't wait to see you on the next one. But until next time, what's the worst that could happen? Let's just go on 3. There's that fat wood stump. Still going strong and will be for a long time. I mean, all that right there is very resin soaked, and that will help keep my fire going for a long time.